UFC 273 takes place April 9th, and what a stacked card it is. In the main event, you've got Alexander Volkanovski defending his featherweight title against the Korean zombie Chan Sung-jung. In the co-main event, you've got a rematch between Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan for the bantamweight title, and then a feature bout of the night in Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. We're going to go through and break down what I think is going to happen on each of these fights, and break down what each fight means for their respective divisions. Let's jump into the main event, starting first with the featherweight champion of the world, Alexander Volkanovski. This guy's on an impressive 20-fight, 9-year unbeaten streak, while the Korean zombie has won 4 of his last 6. Some notable wins for Alexander Volkanovski are against Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, Max Holloway twice, and Brian Ortega. Notable wins for the Korean zombie are Renato Moicano, Frankie Edgar, and Dan Ige, and only dropping 2 bouts to Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega. Alexander Volkanovski stands at 5'6", while the Korean zombie stands at 5'9". They're both very similar in reach, Volkanovski having a 71-inch reach, and the Korean zombie having a 72-inch reach. Overall, I think this bout favors the champion. Alexander Volkanovski is really strong, he's really tough, and he's really quick with his striking. I think the game plan here for the champion is to constantly apply pressure and just keep staying in the Korean zombie's face while moving his head off the center line so he doesn't get caught by those slick counters. Looking at how I think the Korean zombie gets this done is he needs to constantly be moving. He needs to constantly be looking to disturb Alexander Volkanovski's rhythm with his striking and constantly look to see how he can make it so that he can land a counter against the champion. If he can make it a messy dogfight, his chances of that increase, but I just think Volkanovski's too tough. Even if it does get to the ground and the Korean zombie tries to pull a slick submission, I don't see any scenario in which the champ gives up. Looking at the betting odds, it seems to be consistent that Alexander Volkanovski is rated somewhere between a -700 to a -800 favorite. I think that's pretty fair to say. Chan Sung-jung's looking at anywhere between a +450 to a +500 underdog. I do think those odds are pretty indicative of what's going to happen here. I think Volkanovski's going to be able to take him down if he wants to, or be able to just strike with him at will. We might see a knockout, however, I'm more inclined to believe that Alexander Volkanovski gets this done by a decision. What does this fight mean for the rest of the division? Well, if Alexander Volkanovski wins, he cements himself even further as one of the greatest featherweights of all time, but the rest of the division's in an awkward spot. Max Holloway and Brian Ortega have both lost to the champion. I guess you could probably put those two in a rematch and maybe put them up against Alexander Volkanovski, or maybe line up Arnold Allen or Calvin Kattar with Brian Ortega, or maybe have Calvin Kattar and Max Holloway have a rematch and determine the next contender. Either way, I see Max Holloway beating pretty much everybody else in the division, so I think it's going to be inevitable that we see Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski fight for a third time. Next up, we've got the co-main event of the evening. We've got Aljamain Sterling defending his bantamweight title against the interim champion Petr Yan. Now, I don't think that there really is much to cover in this bout. I think if you watch the first fight, you'll see pretty much how this second bout is going to go. I think Aljamain Sterling is a really good fighter. He's really technical, he moves quick, and he's got some solid grappling. I just think Petr Yan is too much for anybody to handle. In their first fight, Aljamain Sterling got off to a really quick start, was able to make some things and control that first round against Petr Yan, but that's kind of typical of Petr Yan. He's a really slow starter. He seems to get things going in the later rounds, and that's when he does his damage. And I think that's what's going to happen here. We're going to see Aljamain Sterling get off to a really quick first round, but I don't see him being able to finish. I think as the fight progresses into the second and third round, you'll start to see Petr Yan start to figure out Aljamain Sterling, become much more aggressive, probably hit him with some big shots, and maybe even take him down. If I were to predict how this fight ends, I think maybe in a 4th or 5th round knockout, if not, Petr Yan by decision. I think the only way Aljamain Sterling wins this fight is if he constantly mixes it up. He has to mix up the striking with the takedowns, because if he's predictable, Petr Yan's going to be able to pick it out and put him out. What does this fight mean for the rest of the division? Well, I think bantamweight is in a really good spot right now. I think no matter what happens with this fight, you've got interesting matchups everywhere you can make at bantamweight. In the top 5, you've got people like Jose Aldo, TJ Dillashaw, Rob Font, Corey Sandhagen. And even in the top 15, you've got Song Yadong, Marlon Vera, Sean O'Malley. It's full of talent right now, and I think there's a lot of matchups that are really interesting down the line for bantamweight. So bantamweight's looking to be in really good shape, in my opinion. Next up, we've got the feature bout of the evening, Gilbert Burns vs. Khamzat Chimaev. Some notable wins for Gilbert Burns are Stephen Thompson, Tyron Woodley, and Damian Maia. Although Khamzat Chimaev doesn't have any big names to his resume, the way he handled Li Jingliang and Gerald Meerschaert in his last fights really speaks to how much further ahead he is than the rest of the top 15. Gilbert Burns vs. Khamzat Chimaev is great matchmaking by the UFC. Although Gilbert Burns hits hard, he's strong, he's got great jiu-jitsu, I don't see him being able to deal with the pressure from Khamzat. Khamzat's got amazing wrestling, he hits really hard, and he just puts out a lot of pressure. I think Gilbert Burns isn't the best at taking a punch. I think we've seen that in previous fights of his. He doesn't have the greatest chin, and I think against a guy like Khamzat, who's always moving forward, always throwing something in your face, I think it just sets him up for disaster. That being said, this is a huge jump in competition for Khamzat Chimaev. We haven't seen him fight anybody in the top 10, and now he's jumping up to fight the number 2 ranked welterweight in the world. I think this is a great matchup for Khamzat Chimaev. He comes forward with a lot of pressure, and in order to nullify that, you need to have quick footwork to create escapes and openings against an opponent like that. I don't think Gilbert Burns does that. We haven't really seen that from him, so I don't think he comes into this fight a brand new fighter. I think he's going to come in with a lot of the things that we've seen before, and what's going to happen is Khamzat's going to be able to get into his face, pressure him against the cage, maybe knock him out early, or just take him down and beat him up all fight. I don't see how Gilbert Burns is going to be able to get his jiu-jitsu off against, from what appears to be somebody with really controlling wrestling. I think the game plan for Gilbert Burns to beat Khamzat here would be to establish a lot of footwork, be always moving, never be standing still, never allow Khamzat to be able to come in and just do what he wants, always be moving. I think the game plan for Khamzat Chimaev here is pretty simple. Apply a lot of pressure, get in his face, take him down, control him, and beat him up. Let's look at the ramifications of this fight. If Gilbert Burns does beat Khamzat Chimaev, we'll see another scenario similar to the Darren Till situation, a promising young contender thrown to the wolves very early. What does this all mean for Gilbert Burns? Well, off principle alone, I don't think that beating the number 11 ranked fighter in your division warrants a title shot, but he is in an awkward situation. I don't think many fans are dying to see a rematch between Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns. I think what is more likely to happen here is to see him fight Colby Covington, and the winner of that maybe gets a rematch or fights the winner of something like Belal Muhammad versus Vicente Luque. What does this mean for Khamzat Chimaev if he beats Gilbert Burns? Well, I think he's the next title contender. I think he gets the next crack at the title. Looking at the rest of the division, I don't know who you would give a title shot to. Although Colby Covington did just beat Jorge Masvidal, both of those guys have lost to the champion twice. I think beating Gilbert Burns puts him right up there, number 1 or number 2 ranked fighter in the division. You've got Vicente Luque and Belal Muhammad waiting in the wings, but I'd like to see those two fight each other, and I think a win over Gilbert Burns is much bigger and more important for anybody in the division. While I wouldn't say it's a safe bet that Khamzat wins because this is a huge jump in competition for him, I think it's extremely likely that he does. I think stylistically this is a favorable matchup for Khamzat, and I just don't see a way in which Gilbert Burns will be able to deal with the pressure from Khamzat Chimaev.